It's free, it's good, but it's probably not in your school yet. This presentation will discuss open source software and why a school should consider using it. First, what is open source software? It's not the same as freeware or public domain software. In order to understand open source software, it's necessary to give a little background on software and how it works. You see, a computer without software just sits there humming, and it's incapable of doing anything. Software has to be created that provides the instructions for the computer to carry out. The computer then works on the binary system, which you've probably heard about, which means that all of the software has to be converted into this machine-readable binary code. Humans, unlike computers, don't really like to think in those ones and zeros of binary code, so tools have been created to convert human-readable code, the stuff that programmers work with, into computer-readable code, and that's the stuff that the computers use. Normally, when you buy software, you only get the machine-readable code. The human-readable code, which is called source code, is retained by the developers of the software. This makes it harder for anyone else to change the software or even tell if the software is doing something that it shouldn't be doing. Open source software is called open source because the human-readable code that's used to create the machine-readable code, that binary code, is not kept private. Instead, it's distributed freely so that anyone can view it or even modify it. Isn't open source only for hackers? No, it's really not. In fact, you probably already use some open source software and you don't even know about it. First of all, every time you browse the web, almost 50% of every website that you run across uses open source software called Apache to run the web server. This is according to netcraft.com. In addition, big names like Google run Linux, which is an open source operating system. So every time you search the internet using Google, and you go to the various websites that you find using Google, you are using open source software. In addition, about 14% of the people use an open source internet browser called Firefox. If you don't, you should, because it's much more secure than Internet Explorer. So open source software is out there, it's good, it's not only for hackers. All of us are already using some versions of open source software. So why should schools consider using open source software? First of all is the low cost. Even though open source software isn't freeware or shareware or public domain software, most of the time open source software is available at little or no cost. This is especially valuable to schools who are always stretching their technology budget and in many cases busting it. Just think, with open source software, an operating system like Edubuntu or Ubuntu, your school would never again have to pay for a license fee or a fee to upgrade to the newest version of Windows or the newest version of a Macintosh operating system. The new versions of these open source operating systems based on Linux are free. The software that you then use on those operating systems, you would never again have to pay a licensing fee to use the software that you need to use to get the job done at your school. Speaking of getting the job done, open source software does get the job done. There are many packages, many open source packages, that do the things that we most commonly do in our schools. Another big advantage of open source software, especially the Linux operating systems, are that there are versions that are fully supported which run on older hardware. Now, I don't know about your school, but many schools have legacy hardware, systems that were purchased 5, 6, even 7 years ago that are still being used in the classroom. New operating systems tend to use a lot more resources than these older systems have, but the Linux operating system can run on that older hardware. So you can often make use of the same hardware for longer using an open source operating system. So, if you're thinking about using open source software, you might ask, well, what can I do with it? The main things that we do in schools, things like creating documents with word processing, no problem, openoffice.org. Spreadsheets, the same thing, there's openoffice.org. Works a lot like any of the typical word processing spreadsheet or office packages that you're already used to. So you want to make presentations, again, no problem. There's software out there that works a lot like PowerPoint and other presentation software. Web browsing, I've already mentioned Firefox, it's free, it's more secure than Internet Explorer, and it does great. Firefox also has a lot of plugins that can add functionality to your web browser. I use a Firefox plugin for doing all of my FTP transfers, for instance. You can use open source software to record podcasts. I'm recording this particular podcast using both a Macintosh and a PC. My PC is running Audacity, which is an open source audio program. You can use open source software to create blogs. You can use open source software to check your email. You can use open source software to do graphic and image manipulation just like you can with Photoshop, only it's free. And you can use open source software to replace the operating system on your computer so that you would no longer have to pay licensing fees for updates of that operating system. Open source software sounds like a good idea, so you might ask, where can I get it? Well, here's the list of a variety of places. SourceForge.net. SourceForge is probably the largest collection of open source software on the net. For an operating system, edubuntu.org. That's edubuntu.org. This is a Linux OS, an operating system that's specifically geared for education. And then there's ubuntu.com. It's ubuntu.com, and this is the Linux that I prefer. Then you have openoffice.org. This is a suite of tools which includes word processing, spreadsheet, database and presentation, and others that you can use just like Microsoft Office. Then you have GIMP.org. GIMP is a photo manipulation program. It works similar to Photoshop. In fact, if you would look at a place called plasticbugs.com, you'll find a product called GIMP Shop, which is the original GIMP, which has been modified to make it work much more like Photoshop. So if you're already used to Photoshop, you can use GIMP Shop, and the training curve is much less. There are web editors available. There's PC video editing available. Open source software makes a lot of sense for schools. It's cheap or free, it has the power to get the job done, and it's very available. But there are still some challenges to using open source software in schools. There are three major challenges that I see: attitude, marketing, and inertia. Attitude. There is an attitude in some places against open source software. If it isn't Microsoft or if it isn't Apple, it can't be good. This is often an attitude in the minds of people who do the technology purchasing or infrastructure support at an institution. And you can't blame them. Many of these people have taken class after class after class. They've spent thousands of dollars becoming certified in a particular operating system or in a particular suite of tools based around a particular operating system, and they have confidence in that system and the people who put it out. They're a little reluctant to, in effect, chuck all of that training that they've gone through in order to adopt a different kind of system. Second, marketing. Just take a look, for instance, at the new Windows operating system. Between Microsoft and the various PC sellers, some people estimate that more than $100 million will be spent on marketing this new operating system, Windows Vista. Now, of course, that's not going to be the case for Ubuntu or any other operating system. So there's a lot of marketing, a lot of advertising goes into convincing us to use the closed source software that's available for large fee. And then finally, there's inertia, and that's just the fact that we've always used X or Y. We've always used Macintosh, or we've always used PC. People are used to it. Our teachers are trained to use this already. They already know how to use PowerPoint. And if you change over to open source versions of any of these different packages, there is a learning curve. You do have to learn where different menu items are. You have to learn different ways of approaching a task in some cases. Again, these are all barriers or challenges to using open source that you might have to overcome if you want to take that leap. What I suggest to people is to start small. Choose one item, one open source item, and introduce that to your school. I would recommend Firefox. Get rid of Internet Explorer and use Firefox for a while. You'll find that people take to it. It's easy to use, it's intuitive, and they can gain some confidence in using this open source approach to software. Then introduce a new open source package. Train people to use that. If you really want to get brave, take a lab and move it into Ubuntu or Edubuntu and move into that Linux open source operating system in a small way and see how it works. Give it a trial, and as you get better at it and as it works, continue the expansion of that adoption of the open source operating system throughout the school or throughout the district. Open source software is something that really has come about. It's time for open source software to be used more by schools. It's cheap or free, it's good, it's widely available, and it really makes sense for our schools.